The first order of business was to find a place to live. We scoured the paper for rentals, but we had trouble landing an apartment. We told landlords we're artists, but when they found out we were street performers, they said you're bums, and they wouldn't rent to us. We finally found living space at the old Ham's Brewery, where empty beer tanks could be rented for $200 a month. When we arrived, we couldn't quite believe what we were seeing, never mind considering. About 50 old beer tanks with people living in them. It looked like they had been there for quite a while. Well, Wheeler and I were stuck. We couldn't manage real apartments, but we were making money passing the hat. So in the middle of the month, we paid $100, and we moved into Tank 306. There were foam stains on the walls. The floor sloped off to a drain in the corner. There are no windows in a beer tank. Someone had left behind a stack of egg carton flats, so we tacked them up on the walls and the ceiling to help absorb the echo. Then we just moved ourselves in. Home sweet beer tank. We were so excited to be settled, we banged out a new edition of the High Street newsletter to brag to all of our friends back home. Out in the hall, we met a kind of folk that we had never met before. There was Jimmy the Elf, a teenager with pointy ears, who lived 2 tanks down with his silent, scowling mother. Laquita, a sassy woman with burned-out vocal cords from drinking Sterno. And then there was Big Dick, who burst into our tank one day to confess the real reason for his nickname. And pretty soon there was a new crowd, a bunch of punk rockers that rehearsed in the tanks. They called themselves the Vat Rats. There was one bathroom for the entire building. And it took 2 more months until we got hot water, but we managed. We paid our rent to Paul. Paul was a good guy, but one month, just to bust his chops, we took all the rent money, rolled it up into a wad, and stuffed it into a wine jug. When the rent was due, we just presented Paul with the jug. We said, "Paul, we're paying you to live in a beer tank. You figure out how to get the money out." We stayed in the brewery for a year, and after we left, the wrecking ball came. The landlord defaulted, and a company bought the building to tear it down. The Vat Rats were all evicted, but they threw a great party to commemorate the event. And I came by with a camera and a tape recorder, and I gathered all these sights and sounds. It was a wild scene, the Vat Rats all thrashing around, and then I showed up in a tuxedo coming from a gig. But I wanted to be there. I was losing my old home too. That evening I snuck in. I took one last visit to Tank 306, and the view brought back vivid memories of our first year in the city. We only spent a couple weeks in the beer tank. After about a month, we were upgraded to the penthouse apartment, a huge room called the Yeast Culture Room. It was the best room in the entire brewery. It had a stairwell to the top floor where the tanks were open, and Wheeler and I used to climb down inside the tanks and practice the great chore of 7-club juggling. We'd spend our days juggling and bantering with the tourists, and in the evening, we'd perch ourselves in the Yeast Culture Room and gaze out the plexiglass window overlooking million-dollar views of the Mission neighborhood. We were completely mesmerized. We'd watch the San Francisco fog tumble in over Twin Peaks, and we'd dream of the unknown adventures that lay before us.